The Man in Shadows. The town of Black Hollow had always been a quiet place, nestled between towering pine trees and veiled in perpetual mist. Its cobblestone streets, lined with gas lamps, whispered stories of an era long past. But beneath the town's tranquil facade lurked an unspoken fear, a tale passed down through generations about a figure known only as the Man in the Shadows. Chapter 1. Whispers in the Dark. It began with the children. They spoke of a tall figure cloaked in darkness, standing at the edge of the forest, watching with hollow eyes. Parents dismissed their fears as nightmares, but when livestock began disappearing and strange symbols appeared etched into tree trunks, the town's unease grew. James Holloway, a seasoned journalist, arrived in Black Hollow seeking a story. He had spent years chasing legends, but nothing had prepared him for what he would uncover. The locals were reluctant to talk, their eyes darting nervously to the darkened streets as if he might be listening. "Best you leave, Mr. Holloway," warned Martha Reeves, the innkeeper. "Some things are meant to stay buried." James, however, was not one to turn away from a mystery. Determined, he began his investigation, unaware that each step brought him closer to the shadows. Chapter 2. The Vanishing. One evening, a young boy named Daniel went missing. His mother swore she had only looked away for a second, but when she turned back, he was gone. The townsfolk formed a search party, their torches flickering against the midnight fog. James followed the searchers into the dense forest. Hours passed, and just as hope began to fade, they found Daniel, standing in a clearing, staring blankly ahead. His lips moved soundlessly, his tiny hands clutched an old locket, his eyes void of recognition. It belonged to Eleanor Whitmore, a girl who had vanished 50 years ago. His skin was ice cold, his fingers twitching unnaturally. Then he screamed, a wail so inhuman that it sent shivers down the spines of all present. Shadows surged around them, shifting and slithering like living tendrils. Something was watching. A grotesque silhouette appeared beyond the trees, its elongated fingers dragging against the bark, leaving deep, unnatural scratches. Chapter 3. The House on the Hill. Determined to find answers, James sought out Black Hollow's oldest resident, Edgar Whitmore, Eleanor's brother. The frail old man lived in a crumbling mansion on the outskirts of town, his mind a labyrinth of half-forgotten horrors. "The Man in the Shadows," Edgar rasped, his fingers trembling. "He watches. He waits. He feeds." James pressed for details, but Edgar grew agitated, his eyes darting to the corners of the room as if expecting to see him emerge. He spoke of a past tragedy, of villagers disappearing without a trace, their homes left in eerie silence with claw marks dug into the walls. He showed James a ledger filled with names, each one crossed out, the ink smeared as if written by trembling hands. Chapter 4. Encounters with the Unknown. That night, James awoke to a strange sound. The wind howled outside, yet his room was deathly still. The air grew thick, pressing against his chest as the temperature plummeted. Then he saw it. A shadow darker than night loomed in the corner, its form shifting, its hollow eyes fixed on him. Its mouth, an abyss of writhing darkness, opened wide, revealing a chorus of agonized whispers. A skeletal hand reached out from within its mass, the fingers unnaturally long, the tips ending in jagged, broken nails. James couldn't move. He wanted to scream, to run, but his body betrayed him. And then it spoke. "Leave, or become one of us." The words slithered into his mind, each syllable laced with the agony of countless souls. A decayed face formed within the shadows. Half-rotted flesh clung to an exposed skull, its jaw unhinged in an eternal scream. And just as suddenly as it appeared, it was gone. Chapter 5, Revelations. The next day, James met with the town's historian, Eleanor Finch, who revealed a chilling truth. Centuries ago, Black Hollow had been the site of a great tragedy. A man, accused of dark sorcery, had been executed in the woods. As he burned, he cursed the town, vowing to return from the void to claim its children. James realized the disappearances, the symbols, the whispers in the dark, all of it traced back to him. Chapter 6, The Final Stand. With the help of Eleanor and Edgar, James devised a plan. They needed to perform a ritual to sever the entity's connection to the town. Armed with torches and ancient incantations, they ventured into the forest. The air crackled with unseen energy. The shadows twisted and writhed as if resisting their presence. Then he emerged. The man in the shadows towered over them, his form shifting like liquid darkness. His hollow eyes bore into James as he raised a hand, the forest trembling at his will. Shadows stretched toward them, forming grotesque figures with gaping mouths and clawed hands. From within their depths, muffled cries echoed, the lost voices of those taken before. James began the incantation, his voice barely audible over the deafening roar of the wind. The entity shrieked, a sound of pure agony, as the symbols carved into the trees ignited with unholy fire. The ground split open, and with one final wail, the shadow was pulled into the abyss. But before vanishing, he reached for James, his icy fingers grazing his skin. A whisper, softer than breath, echoed in his ear. This is not over. Chapter 7, A Town Restored. The mist lifted from Black Hollow, revealing a town reborn. The air was lighter, the streets no longer burdened by unseen eyes. The children laughed freely, unafraid of the dark. James left with his story, but also with the knowledge that some legends are not merely stories. As his car disappeared over the horizon, a single gas lamp flickered, and in the distance, the shadows stirred once more. A cold breath passed through the town, carrying a final whisper. I will return. Epilogue. The true horror. Far beyond Black Hollow, in the depths of an abandoned house, a mirror cracked. In its fractured reflection, two hollow eyes stared back. James awoke in his motel room, drenched in sweat. He reached for his recorder, but his fingers trembled as he played back the tape. Static. Then a voice. James! The lights flickered. The air turned cold. And behind him, in the reflection of the mirror, the shadow loomed once more. The Midnight Cry. Chapter 1. The New Beginning. Emily Carter never imagined that moving to an old Victorian house in the countryside would bring her anything but peace. After a bitter divorce, she sought solitude for herself and her 8-year-old daughter, Lily. The house was a charming yet slightly decrepit structure, surrounded by ancient oak trees and wild rose bushes. It was a fresh start, a place where she and Lily could heal. The first few days were peaceful. Emily busied herself with unpacking, and Lily spent hours exploring the garden. At night, the wind howled through the old house, creating eerie sounds, but Emily dismissed them as the creaks and groans of an aging structure. Chapter 2. The First Cry. On the fourth night, as Emily lay in bed with a book, she heard it, the unmistakable sound of a child crying. The sound was faint at first, drifting through the hallway like a whisper carried by the wind. Emily immediately thought it was Lily having a nightmare. But when she entered her daughter's room, she found her sleeping peacefully, her breath steady. A chill ran down Emily's spine. Perhaps she had imagined it. Shaking off the unease, she returned to bed, convincing herself it was nothing. Chapter 3: The Unseen Presence. The following nights brought more disturbances, soft whispers, footsteps in the hall, and the crying that seemed to grow louder each time. Emily's nerves began to fray. Lily, however, remained unaffected, unaware of the eerie occurrences. Determined to put her fears to rest, Emily began researching the house's history. She discovered that in the late 1800s, the house had belonged to the Holloway family. Their youngest daughter, Annabelle, had mysteriously vanished one stormy night and was never found. Some claimed her spirit lingered, trapped between worlds, forever searching for her way home. Chapter 4: The Shadows in the Dark. One evening, as Emily prepared Lily for bed, the girl hesitated before getting under the covers. "Mommy, I think there's someone in my room," she whispered. Emily's heart pounded. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" Lily pointed toward the old wooden wardrobe in the corner. "She watches me at night." Emily swallowed hard and forced a smile. "It's just your imagination, love. There's no one here." But deep down, she knew there was something unseen yet undeniably present. That night, Emily stayed awake outside Lily's room. At exactly 3 a.m., the wardrobe creaked open on its own. A suffocating stench of decay filled the room. Emily saw a dark figure crouched in the shadows, its face pale, eyes hollow, mouth gaping in a silent scream. The air around her turned ice cold, and the whispers became unbearable. Suddenly, the lights flickered violently, and a loud thud came from the ceiling above. Something scurried across the attic, dragging what sounded like nails against the wooden floor. Emily held her breath as a faint giggle, chilling and unnatural, echoed through the air. Chapter 5: The Cry Grows Louder. The midnight cries became unbearable. They no longer sounded like distant wails, but rather desperate, piercing sobs. The air in the house felt heavy, suffocating. Emily, exhausted and terrified, decided to confront whatever was haunting them. One night, she stayed awake, waiting. When the clock struck midnight, the cry came again, this time right outside her door. Taking a deep breath, she stepped into the hallway, gripping a flashlight. The air was ice cold. "Who are you?" Emily whispered. For a moment, silence. Then a soft voice, fragile, broken. "Help me." Emily turned and gasped. There, at the end of the hall, stood a small girl with pale skin and hollow eyes. Annabelle. As Emily took a step closer, the girl's face twisted into something grotesque. Her mouth stretched unnaturally wide, her eyes black voids. The walls trembled, and an unholy shriek echoed through the house. The shadows along the corridor moved unnaturally, as if something was lurking just beyond sight. The hallway lights exploded, plunging everything into darkness. Heavy footsteps thundered from above, followed by the sound of a chair scraping across the attic floor. Then, something slammed against the walls, making the house shudder. Chapter 6: The Truth Revealed. Emily spent the next day desperately searching for answers. An old newspaper article revealed a chilling truth. The Holloway family had hidden dark secrets. Annabelle had not vanished. She had been locked away by her cruel stepmother and left to perish. Her spirit, filled with sorrow, remained bound to the house. Realizing this, Emily knew she had to help Annabelle find peace. That night, she returned to the hallway. "Annabelle," she called softly, "I know what happened to you. I am sorry." The little girl's ghost appeared once more, tears glistening in her eyes. "I just want to go home." Emily took a deep breath. "You're free now. You don't have to stay here anymore." A soft, warm light enveloped the spirit. Annabelle smiled, her form gradually fading until all that remained was silence. But before she disappeared completely, The walls of the house shook violently one last time, and a blood-curdling scream erupted from within the walls, as if something darker was being left behind. A grotesque shadow, darker than the night itself, slithered across the ceiling, its twisted form writhing as it let out a guttural growl. Emily barely had time to react before it vanished into the darkness, leaving an icy breath lingering in the air. Chapter 7. The Final Horror. Believing the ordeal to be over, Emily and Lily prepared to leave the house. But on their last night, as Emily packed the final box, Lily let out a terrified scream. Rushing to her daughter's room, Emily found Lily frozen in fear, pointing at the mirror. In the reflection, Emily saw it. The grotesque shadow, no longer a vague form but a nightmarish entity with sunken eyes and jagged teeth, its gnarled hands reaching toward them. The walls cracked, oozing dark liquid, and the air was filled with agonized whispers. The house trembled as the entity lunged forward, its elongated fingers inches from Emily's throat. Summoning every ounce of courage, Emily grabbed Lily and sprinted out of the house just as the front door slammed shut behind them. The house groaned, the windows shattered, and a deafening shriek echoed one final time. As they stood outside, gasping for breath, the house fell into an eerie silence. The oppressive weight was gone, but Emily knew some horrors never truly leave. Epilogue. The haunting remains. Months later, Emily and Lily had settled into a new home. But some nights, in the dead of night, Emily would hear it again. The distant sound of a child crying, carried by the wind. And in her mirror, just for a fleeting moment, a shadow would watch, waiting. The nightmare was never truly over. The Monster Under the Bed. Chapter 1. The Horrifying Night. Min was a 12-year-old boy living with his parents in an old house in the suburbs. His room was quite small, just enough for a bed, a wardrobe, and a study desk by the window. But there was one thing that always terrified Min: the dark space under his bed. He couldn't remember when he first started feeling that way, only that every night he never dared to let his feet touch the floor without turning on a light first. His parents always told him it was just a child imagination, but Min knew something was wrong. Every night, he would hear strange noises coming from under the bed, scraping sounds, whispers, and even heavy breathing. That night, Min tossed and turned, unable to sleep. He tried to close his eyes, but his ears remained alert to every sound. Suddenly, a faint click echoed from below. Min froze, his heart pounding wildly. He tried to reassure himself that it was just the wind, but then a chilling whisper called out, "Ming, Ming." The boy screamed, jumped out of bed, and ran straight to his parents' room. When they returned with him, everything was quiet. There was no sign of anything unusual. They told Min not to worry, that he had probably been dreaming, but Min knew it was not a dream. That night, he kept his bedside lamp on, but shadows seemed to dance on the walls, flickering as if something lurked just out of sight. Chapter 2. The Mystery Under the Bed. The next morning, Min decided to check under the bed. With a flashlight in hand, he bent down and shined the light inside. There was nothing but some old toys and dust. But as he was about to pull the flashlight back, something glowed in the darkness. Two burning red eyes staring back at him. Min jerked back, dropping the flashlight. His breath quickened, his hands trembled. Gathering courage, he picked up the flashlight and shone it again, but the eyes were gone. The space under the bed was pitch black, an abyss that seemed to stretch into nothingness. That night, Min heard something new, a slow, deliberate scratching against the wooden floor. It started soft, but grew louder, as if long nails were dragging across the surface. Then came the breathing, ragged and guttural, as though something was exhaling in slow, heavy bursts. Min clutched his blanket and shut his eyes tight, hoping that if he didn't look, whatever it was wouldn't see him either. Chapter 3: The Old Curse. After searching online, Min discovered that previous residents of the house had encountered similar occurrences. One story told of a boy who mysteriously vanished from the very room Min now slept in. The most terrifying part was that the missing boy had also spoken to his parents about a monster under the bed before he disappeared forever. Min felt a chill run down his spine. He dug deeper into the history of the house and found an old newspaper article about a family who once lived there. The mother had become obsessed with an unseen entity and eventually lost her mind. The father of the missing boy had also vanished mysteriously. Min began to feel his breath grow heavier, the room becoming eerily cold despite the closed windows. Each night, the whispers became clearer, this time calling his name, stretching out like a sinister invitation. Occasionally, he would hear faint scratching on the bed frame, as if something was trying to climb up. One night, he felt a freezing breath on his face and saw his blanket slowly being pulled toward the edge of the bed. Chapter 4: The Confrontation. That night, Min decided to face his fear. He set up a small camera, pointing it towards the bed, hoping to capture something. After setting it up, he tried to sleep, but his nerves kept him awake. Around midnight, a loud noise jolted Min awake. He opened his eyes and saw a dark figure slithering out from under the bed. It was a creature with a gaunt, elongated body, wrinkled skin, and glowing red eyes. Its mouth stretched open, revealing rows of jagged, sharp teeth. It crawled forward, its long clawed fingers scratching deep into the wooden floor. A thick, black liquid dripped from its mouth, filling the air with a putrid stench. It crept closer to Min, whispering in a distorted voice like 1,000 overlapping murmurs. At last, it's your turn. Min wanted to scream, but his throat seized up. He felt invisible hands gripping his ankles, pulling him down into the abyss beneath the bed. He struggled desperately, kicking and clawing at the sheets. The creature's grotesque face loomed inches from his own, its decayed flesh peeling away, revealing a gaping void where a mouth should have been. Suddenly, the bedroom door burst open. His parents rushed in, alerted by the commotion. As soon as the light flooded the room, the creature let out a guttural roar and retreated into the shadows. Min immediately jumped off the bed, trembling as he pointed beneath it. But when his parents checked, they saw nothing. Yet Min knew it was still there. Chapter 5: The Ending. Min grew up, but the fear never left him. He always checked under his bed before sleeping. Despite moving to different houses, he still felt those burning red eyes watching him every night. One night, as Min lay in bed, trying to drift into sleep, a cold hand caressed his face. His eyes snapped open, and he shot up in terror. The room was empty, but from beneath the bed, a voice whispered, stretching into an eerie curse. You can never escape. Min no longer screamed. He just closed his eyes, knowing that tonight would be the last time he would ever wake again. The next morning, his parents found his bed empty. The sheets were undisturbed, as if he had never been there at all. His camera remained on his desk, still recording. When they played the footage back, the last thing they saw was Min being dragged under the bed by something unseen before the screen turned to static. Min was never seen again, and yet, in the dead of night, in the quietest of moments, the whispers continued. Ming, Mung,